Our first speaker today is Craig Kielburger. Craig, if you didn't know, co-founded Free the Children, and he did it at the age of 12. He's a phenomenal movement, now has almost 3 million children involved in it around the world, and they have built more than 650 schools globally. Now turn your attention, please, to the big screen as we show you what Craig Kielburger has accomplished so far.
Kids are looking to get involved. They're searching for it. And in an era where, adults often are looking for meaning and purpose in their lives, kids also want to assert who they are, not just by the video games they play or the peer groups they belong to, but by the contribution they make. And that's part of a youth's self-identity in the world. And not only is it good for the child, my God, our world needs it.
Craig Kielburger was a child when he noticed the needs of the world. As a 12-year-old in Canada, he read about the murder of a boy his age in Pakistan. Iqbal Masih was a slave in a carpet factory. Masih escaped to lead a campaign against servitude, but within 2 years he was silenced. Kielburger put down the newspaper and rose to speak.
We're talking about labor and the exploitation of children.
He made Iqbal Masih's fight his own. He talked to classmates, to Congress, to Parliament. To call him precocious is an understatement, as our own Ed Bradley found out in 1996.
But what made you think you could do something about it?
Originally, I didn't think I could, really. But the only way you're going to ever find out is try.
It's been an adventure over 15 years. There are a lot of times where Free the Children came that close to no longer being in existence. You walk into a sports stadium that's now filled with screaming, passionate young people.
With the world. It is so exciting to be here.
I want to hear this side scream.
You are the generation I have been waiting for all my life.
Today is about knowing that we can make a difference.
This world is our world. Keep hope alive.
We must promote human warmth kindness of compassion.
We are all here together because we want to do amazing things to change this world.
We Day is about striving to create a better world. It's about taking action.
You go out there, be yourself, and make a change for others.
We all need to come together and take action.
It's often said that you are our future. You are not our future, you are our right now.
We are each other's hope.
One heart with courage is a majority.
Free Day is fun and educational. The best field trip ever.
Honestly, this has changed my life.
This is the power of we.
Ladies and gentlemen, the power of we. Please meet and welcome Craig Kielburger.
Hi.
Good morning. After Franz, I almost felt I had to jump out on stage or something dramatic. But I want to say what an honor it is to kick off this morning and to start as the first speaker. And as the first speaker, I feel that all of the speakers here on this podium, but everyone in the audience owes a huge debt of gratitude to one person in particular for an extraordinary vision in bringing this conference together. I don't know if Randy is backstage running madly doing logistics or if he is with us in the audience, but if he is, could I ask him to please stand and to receive a round of applause for dreaming up this amazing conference right there in the back, in the Reds. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for what you've created here. Very, very much. Also in what you saw, what we do, I have to say we're part of a much larger team. We've got about 250 staff just in North America running our programs, and we have one of them, Hannah, who's with us from our New York office. If I could ask you to please stand and also be recognized. She's here with the whole conference. And just what an honor it is to join you. You know, as we imagine solutions, well, then the first question that leaps to mind is a solution to what? Where should we put our energy? Where should we put our passion? Where should we put our intellect and time? If I can start with a bit of a story, you heard how Free the Children started when I was 12 years old. A few years later, the phone rang in my home. It was a very formal, very British-sounding voice. And the person on the other end of the phone, in so many words, said that this was a representative from His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama. And in so many words, basically said this is the Dalai Lama's people calling to speak to Craig Kielburger's people. My mom answered the phone. She thought this was pretty amusing because she's the closest thing I had to people. And she thought this was a prank call. So calls in the backyard and says, Craig, someone's on the phone for you. And I tromp up inside and I pick up the phone. And as a kid about 14 years old, the Dalai Lama's on the other side. Invited to a gathering of about 30 individuals, theologians, philosophers, former heads of state, locked in a room together for a week to discuss one question. And they wanted to represent the diversity of the world. And they realized literally at the last minute that they had no young people. So I represented the youth of the world in this room. And the one question they were discussing is, what is the single greatest challenge facing our world today? And you're going to hear a lot of different speakers on stage, I imagine, talk about that same question. I imagine if I asked anyone here, you'd have a variety of answers. This gathering over the course of the week discussed everything you might imagine. It discussed, hunger and the needless loss of life, but said we produce more than enough food. It's a question of the inequitable distribution of food, and discussed climate change and said, well, we put a man on the moon. You don't think we could invent the solutions if we really wanted to, if we had the will to deal with the technology and the political choices to address climate change? And talked about peace in the Middle East and said, people can live next to each other peacefully. We do it all the time. If only we had the will to make the difficult political and religious choices. And constantly, every issue brought forward was shot down and said, we can solve this. In many cases, we know how to solve this. And what we lack, well, we're very, very inventive people. In fact, this group, after a week, kept focusing on this question of how do we create the will? How do we create that political, societal, that willingness to make the tough choices, to tackle challenges, to not walk past when we see the evils or challenges facing our world? And at the end of that week, when they opened the doors, out walked the Dalai Lama leading this procession to the waiting press. And he announced the single greatest challenge facing our world today is that we're raising a generation of passive bystanders. He said at the root of all those challenges we face, it's the fact that so often ordinary people choose not to become engaged. They feel powerless. Ordinary people choosing not to become involved in whether it be politics or philanthropy or service. And how do we turn that around? How do we get people to care? How do we create that compassion and that willingness to act? How do we make sure that this room, when discussing and imagining solutions, isn't filled with, the hundreds who are here, but how do we fill it with tens of thousands, with millions, with billions of people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and to make a tangible contribution? And he concluded at the end of his results, at the end of his remarks, that challenge lay with young people. He said we have to raise a generation not to be passive bystanders, but to be upstanders, to raise their voices. And that starts with the youngest of ages. If I could have the slides, please. That challenge that the Dalai Lama leveled is one that speaks to my own heart in a very personal way, because when I was 12 one day, reaching for the comics in my local paper, I saw this story. A young boy who was 4 when he was sold into slavery, pledged as collateral on a loan. When his family couldn't repay, he was forced to work in a carpet factory, tying thousands and thousands of tiny knots every day, weaving hand-knotted carpets. He escapes at 10, raises his voice, and he's shot dead at 12. Similar to Malala's story in many ways. This young boy shot at 12 years of age. I was 12 growing up in the suburbs. I looked at my life. I looked at his. It made me so angry. I tore it from the newspaper. I brought it to my class. I said, I need your help. There were 11 plus me, 12 of us, all 12 years old. So we started an organization we called the Group of 12-year-olds. Worked for about a whole 2 weeks until one of us had our 13th birthday. Then we changed the name to Free the Children, never imagining that today this is what it would look like, involving millions of kids around the world. When we first started, we called other groups wanting to help. One very well-known charity actually said to us, "You want to help? Do you know your parents keep their credit card? That's how you can help." You know, the limits, the low expectations that so often are set on young people. You know, today we dream of giving that next 12-year-old everything that they need to change the world. We live in an era of reading, writing, arithmetic. What about schools teaching compassion and courage and community? Systematically delivering service learning as part of the curriculum. We do this now for 5,700 schools. Over 250 full-time staff rolling the program first in Canada, now in the Pacific Northwest, the Midwest, and through parts of California. Delivering speaking tours and leadership training, weekly curricular resources, what's happening in the news, how teachers can teach about it. Action campaigns. 3 months ago, we kicked off a campaign, and in 3 months, kids collected 70 million pennies helping with clean water. Or on Halloween, they go trick-or-treating called We Scare Hunger, collecting food instead of candy. Or We Are Silent, 24 hours, no speaking, raising awareness about bullying. Parents love this campaign. Obvious reasons. But these simple actions create massive ripples, tens of millions of dollars raised every year for causes, millions of hours logged in volunteerism and service, around the world. They do half domestic, half international actions. 650 schools built. Clean water medicine for 1 million people. 30,000 small businesses created. Funded mostly by kids. Linking a school in Naples, for example, with a school in Kenya. Adopting a sister village. Learning about it as part of the curriculum. Opening their eyes to the world around them. And how we celebrate this, how we reward them, well, we call that We Day, that giant celebration you saw just a few moments ago. Yes, it's about dollars raised or about volunteer hours logged, but success for us is a bet. And the bet we want to make is to fill this room eventually. The bet we want to make is for your grandchildren and your children, your nieces and your nephews. Because if we inspire them today, if we make it part of the curriculum, if we systematically deliver that service learning education, it will continue for the rest of their lives. I don't just mean a public service announcement or a go-get-em speech. Systematically, like how we do reading, writing, and arithmetic. We track our alumni, a group called Mission Measurement, affiliated with Northwestern. They find 80% of our alum continue to volunteer after leaving these programs in middle school and high school. 83% continue to give every year to charity. My personal favorite, 79% voted in the last federal election if they were over 18, or more than double the national average. People ask why youth aren't voting or why youth aren't consuming the news. They have to show that it's relevant to their lives, that they care about these issues. You create that base of knowledge, that excitement, that engagement, then youth engage further. I'm excited to hear our next panel to have the conversation on youth consuming news because we track our alumni and we find a massive uptick in news consumption. Why? Because they care about it. They want to change the world. They need to know what's happening in the world. Oh, and those We Day celebrations you saw in the video, if you have ever doubted the next generation, if you've ever wondered whether you're leaving the world in a good set of hands, I hope you're smiling. Because we bring 100,000 students together. 3,000 schools every year send delegates. 11 cities. We've been running this for years in Canada. We televise it. We get 1 in 6 Canadians tuning in and watching the broadcast. Largest Facebook cause for charity in the world today. And now this year, 2013, we're rolling it through states across the United States. Our first one happening in Seattle. I want to share with you a quick 20-second clip to give you an idea of that passion and that energy. We jokingly say the We Day stage is the only place you'll ever see the Dalai Lama and Justin Bieber having a conversation on world peace, and it actually did happen. You know, a third are icons who changed the world, the Gorbachevs, the Dalai Lamas, Archbishop Tutus. A third, music, the Jonas Brothers, the Demi Lovatos, the Justin Biebers, and a third, hometown heroes in each region, getting kids engaged. But imagine the day that schools become that mechanism. Boys and Girls Clubs, Scouts. You know, on the We Day stage, you find all types of organizations coming together around the common idea of celebrating and encouraging this next generation. So I want to, in fact, extend an invitation. We love to see your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, to encourage them, to inspire them, and to challenge them to get involved. How do they earn their way? It's free to attend a We Day, but you have to earn it through service. At least one local action, one global action. Doesn't matter the cause, doesn't matter the charity. They're already involved, great. They're looking for one, we'll help them start. We'll give them prepackaged actions. We'll give them youth coordinators. We'll give them social media and tons of celebrity heroes. Well, we love to see them, though, whether it be literally next month in Seattle, a few months later in Toronto for all those Canadians who are, escaping the snow here, soon thereafter maybe in the, Midwest, or even if you join us from halfway across the pond, we roll this to the UK in 2014. A movement of young people. Or that's the local. Here's my challenge. Again, I'm recruiting your grandkids especially, your children especially. We'd love to see them overseas with us. Imagine the idea of building a school. Every year, about 2,000 kids roll up their sleeves, spend their summer or their winter or their March break building, teaching, serving. Their schools adopt a sister school in a developing country. It makes the world come alive in the classroom. We find it happens not only between youth, but increasingly among families. And increasingly, the fastest growing we do, grandparents and grandkids together, literally rolling up their sleeves, helping to build and teach and serve. Here's the shamelessly idealistic dream. We started because of a newspaper headline that said, battled child labor, boy murdered. Imagine we see this newspaper headline instead. A generation of young people leading the world in service. Imagine we see this one literally going across America, tackling the greatest challenges. Why? Because this isn't something 1 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 people. We need every youth to become engaged in the cause that they care about. We need every youth to learn that it's their responsibility and opportunity. And city by city, leading that change to happen. I want to leave you with a final thought. We're a secular organization, but I had the great honor of spending time with Mother Teresa and the work that we do in India. And one time was walking with her to the doors of the mother house as I was leaving. And I worked up the courage to ask her this question that I'd always wanted to ask her, and to ask her, how do you do it? How do you work every single day with people around you who are suffering and who are dying when you know you can't help every person? It's just not possible. And when I asked her that question, she smiled. She took my hands in hers. And when Mother Teresa looked at you, you felt like she was looking into your soul. And she said, you have to realize that in our lives, we do no great things, but we can do small things with great love. And that's the humble challenge I want to leave with you. Those small acts, those small things with great love that start with your children, your grandchildren, and send these ripples of hope out through the world that will find the most imaginative solutions to the world's greatest problems. Thank you very much.
Don't leave. I want to ask you a couple of questions.
Please.
The Pope is retiring.
I saw the news this morning.
There's going to be a job opening for you there if you'd like to take it. I think you'd be good in that job. You began by saying that when you asked the question, what is the greatest challenge the world faces today, the answer came that it was that we're raising a generation of passive bystanders. That's obviously not you. And then you talked about what does it take? How do we get from there to where you want to go. So I'm going to ask you to answer that question, the how question. What does it take for the individual to make that leap to say, I'm not going to be a passive bystander? And I'd like you to answer it by answering describing to the audience the moment at which you became engaged, when you saw that headline about that little boy. What happened to you? What was your reaction that made you move from passivity to activity?
You know, it's interesting because, you know, I shared the story. The spark for me was that article, as you pointed out, that young boy. And reading that in the newspaper, being so angry, tearing it, bringing it to my class. But to answer your question about, you know, what was it in that moment, I look all these years later and realize it actually wasn't just that moment. You know, we wrote a book, my brother and I, we're actually volunteers in doing this. Our passion is this, but we pay the bills through writing. And we wrote a book called The World Needs Your Kid, Raising Children Who Care and Contribute. In essence, a book on raising socially conscious and compassionate children. And we sat down with over 400 child developmental psychologists and teachers and parents and Nobel laureates, and Dalai Lama did the foreword, and these incredible people came together as we tried to find the answer to that question you posed, the answer to the question that Dalai Lama posed. And the answer isn't one moment. You know, every great story, every entrepreneur who will stand up here will tell you about a spark. But they had to believe in themselves before that. They had to be aware and conscious of it. And that starts much earlier on. In my case, I would point to my mom, who could not walk past a homeless person without stopping, without giving some spare change, without asking their name, how long they'd been there, and pulling my brother and I closer into the conversation. I'd point to my teacher, who allowed me to stand in front of my class holding that article instead of looking at us and saying, oh, but we have to prep for standardized tests today. We have to create, as a society, these moments. There's a lot of noise for kids. You know, a one-time public service announcement, a website that might exist, this or that, telling them to go serve and volunteer. But until we as a culture treat it like we do math or science, like we do sending our child to a good school or well-rounded childhood, playing Little League or learning an instrument, until we treat service as being a cornerstone and being systematic in the delivery. You know, I've got an MBA, my brother's a Harvard grad, Rhodes Scholar. It's being systematic, like they prepare us for the best universities and the best institutions. But we have to do the exact same when it comes to service, when it comes to philanthropy, and when it comes to social entrepreneurship. That starts in the youngest of grades in school, that starts in curriculum, that goes all the way through with heroes and role models and trainers and campaigns and everything a kid needs. And until that happens, those sparks will be few and far between, like that article.
Craig, thank you very much. That was just
terrific.
Appreciate it.
A pleasure.
Craig Kielburger.
Thank you very much.